The search for inner peace amidst the whirlwind of modern life has become a constant for many. I personally experience this search intensely, feeling the tentacles of anxiety tightening my daily life, stealing my serenity, and obscuring the mental clarity I so craved. It wasn't a simple passing nervousness, but a nagging presence, a constant noise that prevented me from fully enjoying the moment, focusing on tasks, and truly connecting with myself and others. Nights were filled with racing thoughts. Mornings arrived with a haze of apprehension, and days unfolded in a succession of worries, often about hypothetical scenarios that the anxious mind masterfully created. There were countless suggestions and methods for dealing with anxiety: guided meditation, physical exercise, therapy, mindfulness, and I tried many of them. Each offered a glimmer of relief, a moment of respite, but it seemed the root of the problem remained untouched, patiently waiting for the right moment to re-emerge with full force. Frustration began to set in. I felt myself in a vicious cycle, where the very attempt to combat anxiety seemed paradoxically to fuel it. The pressure to be okay and the feeling of failure when I couldn't manage my thoughts and emotions added an extra layer of stress. It was like trying to hold water in your hands, where with each effort to contain it, more slipped through your fingers. What set me apart, or perhaps what I realized could set me apart, was the need for something practical, accessible, and above all, sustainable. Something that could be integrated into my routine without demanding major changes or time investments that, in my anxious state, seemed unattainable. The idea that a meaningful solution could come from such a small effort was intriguing, almost skeptical. However, hopelessness compelled me to explore less obvious paths, to question the premise that anxiety relief would require monumental sacrifices. It was in this context of experimentation and search for more tangible relief that I encountered the simplicity of a journal. Not just any journal, full of rules and expectations, but a space for free expression, for recording the thoughts that haunted me and the emotions that tried to overwhelm me. The proposal was straightforward. Dedicate just 5 minutes of my day to this practice. 5 minutes. It seemed paltry given the magnitude of the anxiety I felt, but it was precisely this brevity that appealed to me. There was no pressure to write pages and pages, to articulate complex thoughts, or to find immediate solutions. The uniqueness of this journal lies precisely in its proposal to demystify the process of self-knowledge and self-management. Instead of focusing on elaborate techniques or radical lifestyle changes, which many of us anxious people fear due to the difficulty of implementing, the focus is on an act of presence and observation. I believe most people struggling with anxiety have tried various approaches, many of them effective in theory but difficult to maintain in the long term. What this 5-minute journal offers is an accessible gateway, a gentle starting point that acknowledges the time and energy limitations that anxiety itself imposes. The journey I'm about to share isn't about magically eradicating anxiety, but about learning to navigate it with greater awareness and less suffering. It's an exploration of how a simple habit, almost insignificant in its duration, can trigger a cascade of profound internal changes. The hope is that, by opening this narrative, you'll identify with the challenges you've faced and be inspired to consider the transformative power that resides in simplicity, consistency, and above all, the courage to look within, even for just 5 minutes a day. This is the beginning of a discovery. Initially, the practice of recording thoughts for just 5 minutes seemed like a trivial task, almost insignificant compared to the breadth of my concerns. Anxiety, in its insidious nature, often convinced me that only drastic or extensive interventions could offer lasting relief. The idea that a mere 300 seconds could catalyze tangible change seemed like a bold, perhaps even unrealistic promise. Yet the beauty of simplicity lay precisely in its accessibility. On days when energy seemed drained by apprehension itself, when even basic tasks required enormous effort, dedicating 5 minutes felt like a minimized obstacle. It was about sitting down with a notebook and pen, without the implicit pressure to produce something useful or profound. It was an invitation to unpretentious observation of the mind stream, an invitation to witness, rather than immediately fight against, the thoughts that assaulted me. As I incorporated this daily ritual, I realized that the act of writing acted as an anchor. Amidst the dizzying flurry of worried thoughts, the constant what-ifs, the catastrophic projections, the ruminations on past social interactions, the simple act of transcribing them gave them a tangibility they had previously lacked. Thoughts that had floated ethereally and overwhelmingly when committed to paper acquired a more defined, less frightening form. This materialization allowed for re-evaluation. Looking at the written words, I realized, sometimes with surprise, the logical fragility behind certain concerns, the lack of concrete evidence for the panic I felt. This small distance created between the thought and my identification with it was the first glimpse of control. Beyond simple transcription, the journal became a space for identifying patterns. Over the weeks, I began to notice recurring themes: excessive concern about other people's opinions in work situations, anticipatory anxiety related to social commitments, a tendency to catastrophize small setbacks. This systematic identification was crucial. It wasn't just about venting, but also about collecting data on my own mental functioning. Understanding when and about what anxiety manifested itself most intensely allowed me to anticipate triggers and gradually develop more targeted strategies. For example, if I identified that social anxiety surfaced more strongly before meetings, I could mentally prepare, perhaps by revisiting positive journal entries or focusing on realistic intentions for the interaction. Additionally, this 5-minute space offered me a unique opportunity to practice self-compassion. Instead of criticizing myself for being anxious or overthinking, the journal became a place to validate my internal experiences. Phrases like, "It's understandable that I feel this way given the situation," or "I'm going through a difficult time and it's normal for anxiety to flare up," began to populate my notes. This acceptance, rather than resistance, paradoxically lessened the intensity of the anxiety. When we don't fight an emotion, it loses some of its power to dominate. The journal thus became a silent confidant, a benevolent judge that reminded me of my own humanity amidst the emotional turmoil. As we contemplate the journey thus far, it becomes clear how the small fragments of time dedicated to written reflection intertwine, forming a mosaic of progressive self-knowledge. What began as a simple act of jotting down notes to dispel mental fog gradually reveals itself as a process of unveiling, where clarity emerges not from brute force, but from constancy and attentive observation. Each record, however simple it may seem at the time of its conception, contributes to a deeper understanding of the inner landscape, offering glimpses of how thoughts are constructed and emotions manifest in their various nuances. This journey, which prioritizes accessibility and sustainability, demonstrates how simplicity can be a powerful catalyst for significant change. Initial resistance to more complex methods gives way to the discovery that transformative power often resides in what is easily incorporated into routine, even on the most challenging days. It's like adding a drop of color to a blank canvas. A single drop may not alter the entire landscape, but it is the beginning of a new perspective, the seed of a larger work that unfolds with time and persistence. Reflecting on this journey, we realize that the key lies not in completely eradicating the manifestations of anxiety, but in cultivating a more compassionate and informed relationship with them. The journal, therefore, is not a tool for combat, but rather a gentle mirror that reflects the complexity of the individual, allowing for a more conscious and less reactive interaction. The insights forged in this safe space offer a new vocabulary for describing one's experience, transforming what was once abstract suffering into something concrete and, consequently, more manageable. The threads connecting these reflections point to a more integrated understanding of well-being. By embracing the practice with a perspective of acceptance rather than struggle, we uncover the intrinsic capacity for self-management that resides within each of us. The path that emerges from this practice is one that values the continuous journey of learning and adaptation, recognizing that transformation is an organic process, built on solid foundations of self-awareness and self-compassion. We are finally one step closer to consolidating this understanding into a final vision of the impact of this approach.